A 10-year-old black girl was quietly collecting cans after school when she saw an elderly white man in a wheelchair stuck in the mud as rain poured down. Without hesitation, she ran to help, pushed him free, then walked him home to a silent, forgotten house. She thought it meant nothing, but weeks later, when her mother was rushed to the hospital, the man returned, and this time he came to repay her kindness in a way she never could have imagined. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thought. A single yellowish light bulb dangled from the ceiling of their cramped apartment, casting a weak, flickering glow. Zara, 10 years old, sat cross-legged on a thin mattress watching her mother prepare for work. It was nearly midnight, but for Marie the day was just beginning. Marie slipped into her frayed janitor's uniform, the faint smell of bleach clinging to its threads. She tied her graying hair back with a worn elastic, her hands trembling slightly. Under the dim light, Zara saw the calluses and cracks on her mother's skin, hands that had scrubbed endless hospital floors and never fully healed. Marie wrapped a thin scarf around her neck, a shield against the late-night chill. Before leaving, Marie knelt by Zara's mattress and kissed her forehead. "Sleep well, my little girl," she whispered, her voice heavy with exhaustion. Zara nodded, her eyes dry. She knew her mother would work until dawn, mopping corridors while the city slept. "You just go to school," Marie often said. "I'll handle the world out there." But Zara understood more than her mother realized. Marie's purse was always empty, her shoulders always slumped. That's why, every afternoon after school, Zara slipped onto the streets where trash cans overflowed with glass bottles and aluminum cans. It was her secret, a small, heavy act of defiance against their poverty. Yesterday, she'd traded a bag of cans at the recycling center for $3.20, enough for a loaf of bread. She hid the money under her mattress, waiting for the right moment to surprise her mother. But tonight, as Marie's footsteps faded down the hall, Zara felt a pang of doubt. Was it enough? Could her small hands ever carry the weight of their world? She curled up under a threadbare blanket, the light bulb's hum filling the silence. Outside, New York buzzed with life, but in their tiny apartment, it was just Zara and her secret waiting for morning. The midday sun glared off New York's dusty streets, turning the asphalt into a shimmering haze. Zara stepped out of their apartment, a worn plastic bag slung over her shoulder. Her faded t-shirt, its color long gone, clung to her tanned skin. The bag clinked softly with empty cans, their sharp edges pressing against her back. She kept her eyes down, avoiding the hurried crowds. The heat was stifling, but Zara barely noticed. Each glinting bottle or crumpled can was a penny closer to helping her mother. At the recycling center last week, Mr. Lopez had counted her haul, 20 cans, 15 bottles, and handed her $2.80. "Good work, kid," he'd said, his voice kind but tired. Zara passed the grocery store, its air-conditioned hum tempting her to linger. Across the street, the shoe repair shop owner glared if she got too close. She turned toward school, her sandals slapping the pavement. The bag strap dug into her hand, and the faint smell of garbage trailed her like a shadow. Halfway there, she froze. A group of classmates lounged under a leafless tree by the sidewalk. Jason, who'd borrowed her pen and never returned it, spotted her first. His eyes flicked from her bag to her scuffed shoes. "Hey, it's the garbage girl," he shouted, his voice sharp like screeching tires. Laughter erupted, echoing off the brick walls. One girl pinched her nose, exaggerating a gag. "Why do they even let her in our school?" Another muttered, loud enough for Zara to hear. Her cheeks burned. She gripped the bag tighter, her knuckles whitening. The laughter clawed at her, but she wouldn't cry, not here. She lowered her head and quickened her pace, the bag's clinking betraying her every step. Once around the corner, she ducked into an alley, her breath ragged. Alone, she leaned against a wall, her eyes stinging. For a moment, she wanted to throw the bag away, to be someone else. But then she saw a crushed plastic bottle by a trash can. She picked it up, dusted it off, and slipped it into her bag. Another penny. Zara exhaled, steadying herself. She had learned to keep her tears inside, locked in a place where ridicule couldn't reach. She stepped back onto the street, her small figure blending into the city's rush, her bag a quiet promise to keep going. A sudden summer storm swept through New York, raindrops pelting the streets like angry pebbles. Zara had just collected a few bottles outside a convenience store when the wind flipped her shirt's hem. She ran for cover under the awning of a shuttered electrical shop, hugging her damp bag to her chest. Her hair stuck to her cheeks, soaked. She watched the rain blur the city into a gray haze, her breath fogging the air. The world felt too big, too fast. Everyone had somewhere to rush to, but Zara had only her bottles and a long wet walk home. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Across the street, an old man, Mr. Henry, who she'd seen sitting outside his house, sat motionless in a wheelchair, stuck in a muddy puddle. His shirt clung to his back, his baseball cap askew. He stared at the ground, silent, as if waiting for the rain to wash him away. Zara bit her lip. Her mother's warning echoed, "Stay away from strangers, especially old men alone." But another voice, small but firm, whispered, "He's lonely. Like you." She hesitated, her sandals shifting in the wet gravel. She'd seen him before, tossing crumbs to stray cats, his hands trembling. He never smiled, but he never yelled either. The rain stung as she stepped out, her bag bouncing against her hip. She crossed the street, her sandals slipping. "Mister," she called, her voice shaky but loud. "Let me help." Mr. Henry's head jerked up, his eyes sharp. "I don't need help," he snapped, his voice rough like gravel. But Zara saw his wheels sinking deeper into the mud. "You can't move," she said, not pleading, just stating a fact. She grabbed the wheelchair's handles, her small hands slipping in the mud. She pulled, her arms straining, her knees scraping the pavement when she stumbled. Gritting her teeth, she pushed again, using her whole body. A soft clunk sounded as the wheel broke free. Mr. Henry stared at her, his eyes softening, almost disbelieving. "Thank you," he muttered, barely audible over the rain. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still soaked, reflecting the faint yellow streetlights like fragile streaks of fire. Zara pushed Mr. Henry's wheelchair along the now sparsely populated street. The grinding of the wheels on the asphalt created a heavy rhythm. She said nothing. He said nothing. There was only the sound of their steady, slow breathing, occasionally interrupted by a small cough, dry like old dust in Mr. Henry's throat. Zara didn't know exactly where he lived. When she asked, he just jutted his chin toward the end of the street. The one with the faded white paint and peeling wood door. "You can't miss it." His voice was still dry, but this time, it wasn't harsh. The slope leading to the house was low and hidden behind an iron fence. Zara bent down, putting all her strength into her pushing arms. She felt her small muscles tense, her sleeves clinging to her skin, and her wet hair falling over her face. Each step made her breathe harder, but for some reason, she didn't want to stop. It was as if she stopped, Mr. Henry would be stuck there forever, in the mud, in the heavy silence. The house appeared just as he described, faded white paint, a stained awning, and a wooden door with many scratches, as if it had been slammed by the wind for years. When Zara pushed him up the steps, the wheelchair wheel made a soft clump against the edge of the door. Henry exhaled heavily, whether from fatigue or relief, it was hard to tell. "Come in," he said, pushing the door open. The smell of old wood and mildew immediately hit the girl's nose, but it wasn't sharp. It was just a sad smell, like forgotten rooms. Zara hesitantly stepped inside, standing close to the door. The small dark living room had only a single yellow light bulb hanging from the ceiling. An old worn velvet sofa took up most of the space. On the table was a cold cup of tea, next to an open book, the pages slightly curled from the dampness. Zara didn't sit down right away. She just stood there, gripping the strap of her still damp plastic bag of cans, her feet cold. Her shirt had dried a bit, but it still felt heavy with the smell of mud. She was about to decline, say thank you, and leave, but Mr. Henry had disappeared into the kitchen. The clinking of metal came from inside. A moment later, he returned with 2 steaming mugs of hot cocoa. "Drink," he said, placing a mug on the table in front of her. Zara hesitated, then sat down on the edge of the sofa. She reached out, her fingers gently touching the warm ceramic mug. The heat stung her cold skin. When she took a small sip, the sweetness spread quickly on her tongue, mixed with the slight bitterness of undissolved cocoa powder. But she didn't taste bitterness, only warmth. Strangely, her throat felt soothed, as if the warmth had reached places that had been frozen. Mr. Henry sat opposite her, his hands wrapped around his own mug, his eyes looking out the window. He didn't ask questions, he didn't smile, but he was no longer wary. Zara saw his hands, calloused, trembling slightly, just like her mother's hands when she carried her bucket of bleach home from her shift. "Will you stay and have dinner with me?" he asked, his eyes still fixed on the window pane. Zara shook her head. "No, my mom is waiting, I have to go home." She stood up, placing the cocoa mug back on the table very gently. As she walked to the door, she suddenly turned back and bowed her head to thank him. Mr. Henry didn't reply, just gave a small nod. When the door closed behind her, she heard the latch turn. It wasn't harsh, but like a habit. She got home just as it was getting dark. The one-room apartment was quiet. The faint yellow light from the window cast Zara's long shadow on the floor. Marie was waiting by the door, a faded nightgown over her old t-shirt. Her mother's face was grim. "Where have you been?" Her voice was low, hoarse, not a shout, but it made Zara's heart shrink. "What have you been doing to get so dirty?" Zara put her bag of cans aside. The dried mud stained her hands and a grayish smudge marked her shirt. She took a breath and told her everything, from meeting Mr. Henry, to pushing him home, and even the hot cocoa. When she mentioned that he had asked her to stay for dinner, Zara briefly smiled, though she tried to hold it in. "He invited me in like I was family," she said. Marie was silent, her eyes still fixed on her daughter. Finally, she sighed and pulled Zara close. Her mother's arms held her tight, and the familiar scent of sweat and dish soap wafted up, like an old blanket in early winter. But the embrace was more than just love, it was worry, it was fear, it was old unhealed memories. "Zara, I know you're a good kid," Marie whispered in her daughter's ear, her voice trembling slightly. "But you shouldn't get too close to strangers. This world isn't simple, they aren't as good to us as you think." Zara wanted to ask why, but she didn't, because in her heart, she wasn't sure Mr. Henry was a good person either. It was just that he was lonely. And so was she. The next day was cloudy, no rain, but no sun. Zara went to school as usual, carrying her empty bag of cans. But after school, instead of going home, she turned onto the familiar street from the day before. The door creaked open. No greeting, but Mr. Henry stepped aside, making enough room for the little girl to enter. Zara quietly took off her sandals and stepped onto the cold wooden floor. A faint scent of muscle rub still lingered in the house, mixed with the smell of old paper and the slight dampness seeping through the hairline cracks in the wall. Mr. Henry stood with difficulty by the old piano. The instrument was covered in a thin layer of dust, hinting at years of quiet neglect. His hands trembled as he placed them on the keys, and the notes that came out were disjointed. He played an unnamed song, its rhythm lost. "She liked this one too," he mumbled, his voice hoarse, his gaze fixed on a faded photograph on the dusty piano. Just then, a sound came from the door. It opened wider, and there stood Mrs. Marie, in a dark coat and a hood still dotted with raindrops. Her face hardened when she saw her daughter and the strange man. "Where have you been?" she said, her voice low and raspy. "And why are you here?" Mrs. Marie glared at Mr. Henry, her eyes full of suspicion and defensiveness. But then Mrs. Marie froze. Her eyes didn't just see her daughter, they saw the faded photograph on the piano, and the old man trying to play an incomplete song. Her heart seemed to tighten when she recognized the melody. It was the same song her husband used to play for her. She turned to look at Mr. Henry, then at Zara, and she understood. Her eyes welled up. Her suspicion was gone, replaced only by a profound understanding. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling, "I was just so worried." Mr. Henry simply gave a small nod, saying nothing, as if he were all too familiar with such suspicion. That night, the three of them sat together in the small room. Mrs. Marie spoke about her life with her daughter, the struggles at the hospital, and the times she felt completely lost. Zara listened, occasionally glancing at Mr. Henry. He remained silent, taking in every word. When Mrs. Marie finished, Mr. Henry finally began to speak. His voice was husky, but not from a cough, it was from the weight of his emotions. I once had a family, he said, his hand stroking a wooden letter tile with a T. My wife Elise and my son Toby. He told them about the accident, about the loss of the two people he loved. Zara saw a glint in his eyes, but no tears fell. He explained that he had shut his world off ever since that day. Until this little girl came along, he said, looking at Zara. She didn't ask, but she listened. She changed me. Zara felt a strange warmth fill her heart. Mrs. Marie took Mr. Henry's hand, her eyes filled with empathy. I understand that feeling, she said. When you lose something precious, you're afraid of the world outside. But then something else comes along, and you can't keep your heart closed anymore. The three of them sat in silence, and the room became cozier than ever. The bond between them had been mended, not by blood, but by understanding and sharing. Zara no longer felt alone, and she knew that from this moment on, she had gained another family. Everything went wrong on a stormy night. Marie slipped on the hospital stairs, fell, and was badly hurt. Zara ran home, sobbing. Henry tried to stay calm, and took Zara to St. Mary's Hospital. He sat in the hallway, his arm around her shoulder. A doctor came and gave him a bill for an advance payment. It was a long number. Henry reached into his pocket and pulled out a small amount of money. I pay it in installments, he said. The doctor looked at him, then at Zara, his eyes full of suspicion. I'm sorry, this surgery requires a guarantor, and we can't take a risk with someone who can't pay. Who do you think you are? A beggar? Just then a passing nurse sneered. What kind of money do black people have? A kid and a disabled old man. You'd better take her to a charity hospital. Her words were like a knife, stabbing Henry. He lowered his head, his hands trembling. Zara hugged him tightly, her eyes filled with tears. For the first time she witnessed the cruelty, the terrible prejudice of the world her mother had warned her about. Henry went back home, his heart heavy. He looked at his old wedding ring. It was no longer a symbol of a painful past, but a reminder of his helplessness. He had to do something. The night sky was moonless. The street seemed to have been coated in a thin layer of gray, tired ash. Zara sat with her legs tucked up on a low plastic chair next to the hospital bed. Her eyes never left her mother's face, pale under the cold fluorescent lights. The IV machine beeped steadily. The smell of antiseptic and alcohol in the air created a thin, taut atmosphere, like a wire about to snap. Her mother lay motionless. One leg was bandaged and propped up with a white cloth sling, with a metal brace peeking out from beneath the dressing. Her left arm was bruised, so purple that the color of her skin didn't resemble any tone Zara had ever seen. Her chest rose and fell slowly, each breath sounding like it traveled a rough road. Zara hugged her old doll tightly. It was the only doll she had kept after selling many old things. Most of its synthetic hair had fallen out, but its purple dress was still intact. Her mother had sewn it for the doll with leftover fabric when she was 6. Back then, Zara had said, "This is a princess, her name is Mirabelle." Her mother had smiled, stroking her hair. "You are the queen." Now the princess sat still in Zara's arms, silently, and the queen lay there, unable to speak. Zara didn't cry. There were no more tears left. She had cried them all. When she ran into the hospital, when she saw the blood stain on the nurse's blouse, when she signed the admission papers for her mother, her hand shook, the pen fell 3 times. The nurse had asked, "Where is the patient's legal guardian?" She didn't know how to answer. She was only 10 years old. 2 hours later, a doctor came and gently placed a piece of paper on the folding table beside the bed. An advance payment bill. A long number with many zeros. Zara stared at it as if looking at a giant mountain about to collapse on her. She didn't understand all the terms, but the last line, required payment before surgery, she understood. She left the hospital, still holding Mirabelle. Outside the sky was still moonless. The cold night wind snaked through her thin collar. Zara wasn't wearing a jacket. She didn't have any money. She only had a pair of sandals with a ripped sole and an empty plastic bag. She went to the pawn shop at the end of the street. She placed the doll on the counter, her eyes looking up at the fat man eating a hot dog. "I need to borrow some money. This doll is very special," she said, her voice hoarse. The man glanced down at the doll and laughed. It's not even worth a nickel." He pushed the doll back, still stuffing his face with hot dogs. Grease glistened on his fingers. Zara hugged Mirabel again. Her heart felt as if it was being cut by a blunt knife, slowly, with a lingering pain. She went from one shop to another, knocked on the doors of old acquaintances, a person who used to be her mother's friend from the nursing home, someone who had once borrowed money from her mother. No one opened the door. One person said, "Sorry, this isn't a good time." Another pretended not to hear the doorbell. Zara returned to the hospital just as the sky began to lighten. Her eyes were dry, her lips were cracked, her hands were stiff with cold. She sat down on the old chair, placed Mirabel next to her, and finally, buried her face in her hands. For the first time, she sobbed out loud. No one heard her, no one saw her, but inside her, something had broken. Henry didn't find out from a phone call, or from anyone telling him. He knew when Zara stopped coming. 3 days, not a single knock on the door, not a single package of cookies on the steps, no soft laughter in the hallway, just an absence, and he knew absence was the alarm bell of poverty. He rummaged through an old notebook, the one he used to record his wife's medical appointments. A page had been torn out, but a handwritten address remained. St. Mary's Emergency, 119 South Street. He grabbed his jacket, put on his cap, and got out of his wheelchair. The first taxi stopped, then drove away when it saw him. The second one slammed on its brakes, the driver sticking his head out. "I don't pick up homeless people." His voice was full of contempt, like a splash of cold water to the face. Henry sat on the curb. His lips were pressed together. His heart pounded. His hands clenched the armrests of his chair. A gust of wind blew, and his baseball cap flew off his head. He didn't pick it up. He didn't even bend down. He just sat still for a long time, until he decided to get up, slowly, heavily, but surely. The house was as silent as always. But this time, he opened the drawer under the bed. A small safe was hidden behind old cloths. There was no money inside, only old business cards, the house deed, and a silver wedding ring. He pulled out a card. The phone number faded with time, but he remembered it. "Raymond here." The man's voice on the other end was surprised. "My God, Henderson. You're still alive." He didn't answer right away. He just took a soft breath, and then said, "One word at a time. I need help. There's a family. They need to be saved." Silence. "Then I'll take care of it." A week later at the hospital's billing counter, the clerk received a thick envelope. There were no documents inside, just a white card with shaky handwriting, to Zara and her mother. A friend. Henry. Zara didn't know anything about it. When the doctor announced, "The surgery has been approved," she stared at him as if he were speaking a different language. She didn't ask who paid. She just looked over at her mother, who was now awake, her eyes slightly open, and took her hand. Mirabel lay nearby, her purple dress wet with tears, but this time, the tears were of relief. Zara didn't know that on that same night, in the White House that had once been wet with rain, Henry had replayed the first recording. "You did something the whole world forgot to do. You treated me like a person." Zara's voice came on next, small and slightly trembling. "You did too." He listened to it 3 times. And on the 4th time, he smiled. It wasn't long, but it was real. The first morning in the new house, the sunlight streamed through a window that was 3 times larger than the old apartment. Zara woke up not to the sound of garbage trucks or people arguing upstairs, but to the smell of toast. She opened her eyes, and the soft white blanket slid off her shoulders. The faint scent of burnt butter, a smell that had previously only been at school parties she wasn't invited to, now floated in the air like something unreal. Her room. Hers. Zara reached out to touch the edge of the bed, then slid her hand down to the smooth, cold wooden floor. On the wall were paintings she had drawn herself, 3 people holding hands, without a signature. Anyone would know who they were. Zara, her mother, and Mr. Henry. No, not Mr. Henry. Just that. like how he would refer to himself in the recordings. "This is Henry. It's raining today, my legs are a bit tired, but I remember the cassava bread my wife used to make." Her mother was in the kitchen, her bandaged foot propped up gently on a stool. She no longer had to work the night shift. She was slicing an apple, her hands trembling slightly, but her face no longer held the gray trace of fatigue. Zara walked over and hugged her from behind. Marie tilted her head and smiled. A gentle smile like a streak of early summer sun. Henry was reading the newspaper in the living room. The New York Times, with the scent of fresh ink. Zara walked over and tucked a new drawing into his lap, a picture of a house with a white picket fence and a piano. Henry looked at the drawing and blinked. He didn't say anything, but his hand touched her shoulder and stayed there, not loose, not tight, just enough to let her know he was there. In the afternoon, Zara quietly went into Henry's private room. She didn't knock, the door was ajar. The room was the same, the old piano, a bookshelf full of notebooks, and the old picture frame, leaning on the table. But there was a new addition. The handkerchief embroidered with the letter Z was in a small glass frame, placed right on the piano. Zara took a small cream-colored candle from her jacket pocket. She placed it on the table next to the picture frame. Then from behind her back, she took out a small cake, misshapen, but with real vanilla frosting and 3 bright red strawberries. She had spent 2 weeks' worth of allowance to buy the ingredients. Her mother helped bake it. She decorated it herself. "I saw his birth date in your old papers," she said, her eyes fixed on the candle. "His name was Toby, right?" Henry stood there, frozen. A moment later, he walked slowly to the table and looked down at the cake. On the cake was a crooked message written in white frosting, "Happy birthday Toby," no year, no last name. Just that. Zara lit the candle. Henry didn't stop her. He didn't say anything. She sang softly. Her voice was not perfect, but it was full. Henry sat down in the chair, his hands on his thighs. The flame on the candle flickered, reflecting in his eyes, eyes that were like a still lake that had suddenly rippled. For the first time Henry cried. Not with sobs, not with sniffles. Just silent tears falling. Zara didn't touch him, she just sat next to him. Her hand was on the table, close enough to his that if he wanted, he only had to move his hand an inch to touch hers. Henry closed his eyes, then blew out the candle. The following month, the name Zara Marie Foundation appeared for the first time on a wooden sign in front of the old building where Zara had lived, a center to help poor children and lonely seniors. Zara looked at the sign as if she couldn't believe it was real. Her name, her mother's name, written in white capital letters on a brown wooden background. Henry said, "This is what I have to do." Zara just nodded, but in her heart, something had just blossomed again. She started going to the center with Henry, helping to distribute food and read stories to the elderly. Some seniors couldn't even remember their own names, but called her Little Angel. She didn't correct them, she just smiled. Once, at a small ceremony at the public library, Zara was invited to speak. She wore a new dress, light yellow. Her mother sat in the front row, and Henry was next to her, holding a tape recorder. Zara walked up to the wooden podium. She didn't bring any notes. She looked at the crowd. There were people filming, children holding hands with seniors, and her old teacher sitting at the back of the room. She took a breath. "I used to think I was picking up garbage to survive," she began, her voice trembling. "But now I know what I picked up was worth so much more. It was a heart that never stopped beating." There was a moment of silence, then applause, not in unison, but genuine. Zara saw Henry turn his face away, wiping his glasses. One afternoon, it rained again. It wasn't a downpour, just a drizzle. Zara, now 11 years old, walked across the wet sidewalk, holding an umbrella. On a bench in front of the library, an old woman was huddled, her cloak tattered. No one noticed her. Zara walked over and held the umbrella over the woman's head. The woman looked up, her eyes bewildered. Zara didn't say anything. She took a handkerchief out of her pocket and handed it to the old woman. Then she sat down next to her. The wind blew, cold. But under the small umbrella, two people sat close together. Zara listened to the sound of the rain on the fabric, and in her head, she heard Mr. Henry's voice, from an old recording. "You didn't change the whole world, Zara, but you changed my world, and your own." She smiled. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to say anything. Her heart had made its choice, and it would never stop beating.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.